The night Rome realized it could fall. The swords were already rusting when the Romans realized they were no longer the strongest army on earth. It happened on a cold autumn night in 378 AD, when the smoke of burning villages drifted over the Balkan hills and the empire's finest legions, once the terror of the known world, marched forward with armor dented, supplies low, and confidence broken. They still wore the iconic red tunics, still carried the eagle standards, still believed Rome was eternal. But that night, every soldier felt it. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. For centuries, Rome had crushed enemy after enemy with military perfection. But now, the machine was breaking. Not in a sudden explosion, no, Rome was a giant that died slowly. And the men on that battlefield were the first to hear the giant breathe its final heavy breaths. The warning nobody in Rome wanted to believe. The disaster began years earlier when strange reports reached Roman generals. Tribes on the empire's borders were moving, not small raiding bands, but entire nations. Tens of thousands of warriors, families, carts, cattle, and chieftains. Rumors said something terrifying was pushing them west. Something Rome didn't understand. The Romans dismissed it, calling the newcomers barbarians, believing they could handle them like always. But these weren't the same tribes Rome fought before. These people were desperate, hungry, cornered, and armed with a new kind of motivation, survival. The legion that wasn't a legion anymore. The Roman legions marching to stop them were not the legions of Caesar's time. Many soldiers were undertrained. Some didn't even speak Latin. Pay had been delayed for months. Corrupt officers sold supplies to black markets. Armor was repaired so many times it barely held together. One commander wrote, "Our men carry shields like cracked pottery and helmets once owned by their grandfathers." This wasn't the Roman war machine the world feared. This was a tired empire pretending to be strong. A new enemy Rome couldn't predict. Across the dark fields stood the Gothic warriors, tall, silent, watching the Roman campfires with cold eyes. Their leaders, Fritigern and Alavivus, had once begged Rome for asylum. Now they waited with armies that outnumbered the Romans and knew the terrain better than any imperial soldier. Rome thought it could control them. Rome thought it could intimidate them. Rome thought wrong. The night before the battle. As midnight approached, an uneasy stillness settled over the land. Veteran centurions whispered to each other. "This isn't like the old days. Where are the reinforcements? Does the emperor even know how bad it is?" The truth? No, he didn't. Emperor Valens, sitting in his distant palace, believed victory was guaranteed. He wanted glory, a triumph, and a place in history beside Julius Caesar. He ignored the warnings of scouts, ignored the letters from generals, ignored the truth. In the flickering torchlight, soldiers looked up at the sky and saw ravens circling overhead, an omen Romans feared. Yet orders were orders. And at dawn, they would march. The first crack in an empire. When the first horn sounded in the morning mist, the Romans expected their enemy to flee. Instead, they heard a thunderous roar, tens of thousands of Gothic warriors charging downhill. The ground shook. Some Roman soldiers froze. Others whispered prayers. A few dropped their shields. This wasn't just a battle. This was the moment Rome realized it could lose. The legions held their line as long as they could, but the cracks were everywhere: late arriving cavalry, confused orders, overheating armor, exhausted troops. What had once been the world's greatest army was now outmatched, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered. And as the two armies collided, the fate of the Roman Empire changed forever. This battle, Adrianople, would become the beginning of the end. Not because Rome lacked courage, but because Rome refused to believe it was mortal. The barbarian nations Rome didn't see coming. For most Romans, the word barbarian meant something simple. A wild man with tangled hair, animal skins, and no discipline. A man who charged with fury but broke under pressure. That stereotype had kept the empire comfortable for centuries. But by the 4th century, the world beyond Rome's borders had changed. Entire nations had evolved, faster than Roman generals realized. And they were unlike anything the empire had ever faced. These weren't raiders. These weren't scattered tribes. These were mobile civilizations, each carrying the same dream. Escape the unstoppable force sweeping across the east. And survive at any cost. Rome didn't see them coming because Rome believed nothing truly threatened it anymore. The storm from the east, the Huns. The first tremor of Rome's coming collapse began thousands of miles away, deep in the Eurasian steppe. No Roman scout had ever seen it. No Roman report ever described it correctly. The threat moved too fast, hit too hard, and disappeared too quickly. They were the Huns. To the Goths, Vandals, Alans, and everyone living on the borders of the empire, the Huns were not human enemies. They were a force of nature. Riders who grew up in the saddle. Archers who could fire backward at full gallop. Warriors who filed their teeth to look terrifying. Nomads who could travel farther in a single day than a Roman legion in a week. One Gothic survivor described them. They came like shadows over the grass. By the time we heard them, we were already dead. When the Huns exploded into Eastern Europe, they didn't invade, they erased. Villages vanished. Tribes fled. Entire cultures collapsed overnight. Rome wasn't their target. But the people fleeing the Huns were. The Gothic nations on Rome's doorstep. The Goths, divided into Visigoths, Western Goths, and Ostrogoths, Eastern Goths, had lived peacefully for generations near the Danube frontier. They traded with Rome. They admired Roman clothes, Roman ironwork, Roman wine. Many spoke enough Latin to barter. But when the Huns descended on them like a tidal wave, admiration turned to desperation. Tens of thousands of Gothic families. Exhausted, starving, terrified. Stood at the Danube begging Rome. Let us cross. Let us live. We will serve your armies. Just save us from what hunts us. It was the greatest humanitarian crisis the empire had ever seen. Rome let them in. But Rome was not prepared to feed them, settle them, or control them. This single decision, made in kindness and arrogance, would ignite the spark that burned an empire. The Vandals, refugees who would one day build kingdoms. Alongside the Goths were the Vandals, another refugee people. They, too, ran from the Huns, crossing frozen rivers and hostile territories with only what they could carry. Rome saw them as trouble. Rome believed they were weak. But the Vandals were adaptable in ways Rome had forgotten how to be. They traveled light. They lived off what the land gave. They fought in family groups, meaning, they fought like people defending their own blood. These were not wild raiders. These were survivors. One Roman wrote, "They move with the patience of wolves. They wait until we sleep, then strike like lightning." Rome would one day learn this firsthand. But by then, the Vandals would be strong enough to take North Africa, seize the empire's grain supply, and sack Rome itself. But that comes later. The Alans, the ghost riders of the steppe. The Alans were different, horsemen from the steppes with a reputation that even the Huns respected. They were masters of cavalry tactics, using long spears and lightning-fast charges that could break almost any infantry formation. To the Romans, their style of warfare felt alien, unpredictable, and almost supernatural. These were warriors raised on endless plains, where survival depended on speed, precision, and fearlessness. When they migrated toward Rome, they didn't come as enemies. They came as mercenaries, as allies, as wandering peoples seeking the same thing the others sought. A place the Huns could not reach. Rome welcomed them at first. Rome would later regret that. The empire's blind spot. Rome's greatest weakness wasn't military decline or political corruption. Not yet. Rome's biggest weakness was misunderstanding. Roman commanders believed. Barbarians feared them. Barbarians were unorganized. Barbarians would always break under discipline. Barbarians wanted Roman culture, not Roman blood. But these new nations were not barbaric hordes. They were worlds on the move. Children in wagons. Warriors riding under banners. Elders carrying memories of lands they would never see again. Entire societies shifting across continents like a slow, unstoppable tide. Rome didn't face enemies. Rome faced displaced civilizations pushed against its borders by an even deadlier force behind them. But in Roman eyes, the Goths, Vandals, and Alans were still the same old barbarians they defeated 100 times. This arrogance, this blindness, would cost Rome more than any battlefield loss. It would cost Rome its future. The corruption that rotted Rome's armies from the inside. Rome did not fall because it lacked soldiers. Rome collapsed because the soldiers it had were trapped in a system that no longer worked. By the late 4th century, the Roman army still looked intimidating from a distance: armored ranks, shining standards, disciplined formations. But behind the curtain, everything was breaking down. The legions that once conquered the world were now being eaten alive from within by corruption so deep, even the emperor couldn't fully control it. To understand why Rome's armies failed, you must understand the disease growing inside them. And that disease had a name. Greed. The generals who bought their ranks. In the early days of the Republic, a Roman general earned command through decades of service, battlefield achievements, loyalty to Rome, respect from their troops. But in the late Empire, you could become a general if you had money, political allies, the right friends at court, willingness to bribe the right people. Many commanders standing before Rome's armies at Adrianople had never led true soldiers in a real battle. Some had never even seen major combat. They wore polished armor, gave loud speeches, and pretended to embody Roman tradition. But when the moment of truth came, They froze. They panicked. They issued contradictory orders. They argued among themselves. A Roman historian wrote bitterly, "We were led by men who looked like generals, but fought like accountants. Supply officers who stole the empire to death." Every Roman soldier depended on a supply chain stretching miles behind the front line. Grain, oil, wine, iron, leather, horses, everything moved through a system filled with administrators. And that system was a black hole of corruption. Supply officers routinely sold military food on the civilian market, replaced new armor with broken gear, took bribes to issue better equipment, diluted wine and oil, pocketed soldiers' pay. Entire wagon loads went missing every month. One frustrated legionary wrote, "By the time food reached us, rats had eaten more than we did. How can an army fight on an empty stomach?" Rome was about to learn the hard way. Barbarian mercenaries Rome couldn't control. By this era, Rome relied heavily on foederati, barbarian soldiers hired as allies. In theory, they strengthened the Roman ranks. In reality, they often complicated everything. These warriors demanded more pay, refused suicidal orders, protected their own tribal leaders first, fought well only when their interests aligned with Rome, sometimes switched sides if promises weren't kept. The Romans needed them, but feared them. In some camps, Roman-born soldiers made up only 40% of the force. Latin was barely spoken. Old Roman discipline faded as new cultures mixed, each with its own priorities. Rome's armies were no longer Roman. The officers who lived like kings. Meanwhile, high-ranking officers, safe far from the front, lived in luxury. Marble villas, feasts, wine fountains, silk clothing, personal bodyguards, private hunting estates. These men talked about defending Rome, yet avoided danger at all costs. When disaster struck at Adrianople, many of these commanders fled the field before lifting a sword. They were politicians wearing armor, not warriors defending an empire. Training that disappeared. Once, Rome's training was legendary. A recruit became a soldier only after weapons practice, shield drills, mock battles, long marches, building roads and fortifications, discipline tests, strict punishments. But by the late Empire, training lasted weeks, not months. Standards dropped. Recruits were rushed to the front lines. Weapons practice was inconsistent. Many soldiers didn't understand basic formations. It wasn't entirely their fault, Rome didn't have time. The border was collapsing everywhere at once. But when undertrained troops face battle-hardened Gothic warriors, the result is predictable. A split empire meant split priorities. By now, Rome had two emperors. One in the east, one in the west. They were supposed to cooperate. But cooperation requires unity, and Rome had none. Eastern generals refused to help the West. Western advisors sabotaged Eastern plans. Both sides wanted credit for victories. And both blamed the other for defeats. While they argued, the enemy marched. This political rivalry left Rome's armies leaderless when it mattered most. No one wanted to share glory. No one wanted to admit weakness. No one wanted to be the emperor who looked weak by asking for help. So instead, they did nothing. And nothing is the most dangerous strategy of all. The soldiers who lost faith. For centuries, Roman soldiers believed Rome was eternal. But now, they saw late pay, rotten food, broken weapons, corrupt officers, incompetent commanders, allies who weren't loyal, an empire arguing with itself. The legions weren't just exhausted physically. They were exhausted emotionally. A broken army can still fight. But an army that no longer believes, that is an army already defeated. And this was the army marching toward Adrianople. An empire resting on the shoulders of men who no longer trusted it. A military machine rusting from the inside. A giant made of sand. And the storm was almost here. The emperor who ignored every warning, Valens and the road to disaster ****. The fall of great empires is rarely caused by enemies alone. More often, it happens because someone at the top refuses to listen. For Rome in 378 AD, that someone was Emperor Valens, a man who had power, authority, and armies at his command. But lacked the one thing an emperor needed most: wisdom. Valens was not a monster. He was not cruel. He simply believed something dangerous. He believed Rome could not lose. And when a leader believes that, disaster follows. Valens, a man in Caesar's shadow. Valens had always lived in the shadow of giants. His brother, Valentinian I, was a soldier emperor, strong, fierce, respected, feared by those who threatened the empire. Valens was the opposite. Dutiful but insecure. Cautious yet stubborn. Intelligent but indecisive. Eager for glory he had never truly earned. He wanted the legacy of Caesar, but possessed only the confidence of a bureaucrat. When reports arrived that the Goths were restless, starving, and furious at Roman corruption, Valens didn't see a crisis. He saw an opportunity. His advisors whispered, "Crush the Goths, and you will be remembered as the hero who secured the East." And Valens wanted that legacy more than anything. Warnings he ignored. In the months before the battle, Valens received countless warnings. 1. Scouts reported massive Gothic numbers. Valens dismissed them, believing scouts exaggerated. 2. Generals warned the army was tired and undersupplied. Valens accused them of cowardice. 3. Survivors from early skirmishes said Gothic cavalry was unmatched. Valens refused to believe barbarians could master cavalry tactics. 4. His advisors urged him to wait for reinforcements from the Western Emperor, Gratian. Valens believed Gratian would steal his glory. Every piece of advice pointed to the same conclusion. Wait. Prepare. Strengthen. Valens chose the opposite. The ghost of Emperor Julian. Part of Valens' stubbornness came from the memory of a different emperor, Julian, the warrior philosopher who nearly restored Rome's former glory. Julian's campaigns were the stuff of legend, victories that echoed across the empire. People compared Valens to him. And Valens hated it. When his advisor said, Julian would have waited, Valens replied, "I am not Julian." And for once, he was right. Julian listened. Julian analyzed. Julian led from the front. Valens did none of these things. Gratian's reinforcements, the help Valens didn't want. Western Emperor Gratian, young but competent, marched with his army to join Valens. Together, they would outnumber the Goths and crush them easily. But Valens feared something else. If Gratian arrived, the victory would belong to Gratian. So he made a decision that sealed Rome's fate. He marched before Gratian arrived. A Roman chronicler wrote, "Valens feared losing glory more than losing the empire. The council of war, a decision born of pride." On the eve of battle, Valens gathered his commanders. Inside his tent, lit by torches, the air was thick with tension. Some officers pleaded, "Wait for Gratian. The Goths are stronger than they appear." Others, seeking favor, said, "Victory is certain. The barbarians are starving. Strike now." Valens listened to the wrong voices. He believed the Goths fled because they feared him. He believed they would break as soon as his legions attacked. He believed the battle would be swift and glorious. He believed. And believed. And believed. But never verified. Outside, the Gothic warriors sharpened blades and waited calmly. They knew the Romans were coming. They were ready. A battlefield chosen in ignorance. Valens marched his soldiers toward a landscape he didn't understand. Dry, open plains. Scorching sun. No shade. No water. Rolling hills hiding enemy cavalry. His men were exhausted, dehydrated, and overheated before the fighting even began. Meanwhile, the Gothic forces held the higher ground and were fresh, fed, and supported by hidden cavalry units that Valens never scouted for. The emperor walked into a trap, but believed it was a triumph. The final warning. Just before the battle began, a group of scouts galloped back to the Roman camp. They knelt before Valens and delivered their final report. "My emperor, the enemy is larger than we thought. There are more wagons, more warriors, more cavalry. We are outnumbered." Valens stared at them, silent. Then he said, "You are mistaken. Rome does not fear barbarians." Those were his last confident words. Hours later, he would vanish in the smoke of battle, his body never found. The emperor who ignored every warning would become the emperor lost forever. Adrianople, the day Rome's army died. It began under a brutal sun. A sun so hot that Roman armor felt like iron ovens strapped to their bodies. The air shimmered. Shields burned to the touch. Sweat pooled beneath helmets. And yet Emperor Valens ordered the march. The legions, exhausted from days of movement, trudged across the dry plain toward the Gothic camp, where thousands of wagons formed a giant defensive circle. Smoke from cooking fires rose lazily into the sky. A strange silence hung over the battlefield. A silence Rome should have feared. For hidden behind those hills was the cavalry that would end an empire. The misunderstanding that started the end. As Roman lines approached, a small group of Gothic warriors rode out under a white cloth, an offer to negotiate. But as the Gothic envoys approached the Roman front, a group of overeager Roman archers loosed arrows by accident, or impatience. The envoys scattered. The Goths roared with fury. And the negotiations that might have avoided the greatest military disaster in Roman history vanished in an instant. Rome had just declared war. Without meaning to. The battle begins, Rome advances blind. Valens ordered his infantry forward. Cohort after cohort moved in disciplined lines. The ground shook beneath the iron march. Dust billowed behind their sandals. The Roman left wing advanced first and immediately clashed with Gothic warriors rushing from the wagon circle. Swords met shields. Spears splintered. The roar of combat echoed across the plains. At first, Rome held. At first, Rome pushed the Goths back. For a brief moment, it seemed Valens might be right. But the emperor didn't know a crucial piece of information. The Gothic cavalry, 10,000 of them, were still not on the field. They were returning from a raid. And they were about to arrive. The wagon circle erupts. Inside the Gothic camp, women, elders, and children screamed prayers as warriors fought outside. Every Gothic fighter knew, if they lost, their families died. This wasn't just a battle. This was survival. The Goths pushed back with ferocity Rome hadn't seen in generations. Their shields were wooden but thick. Their axes were heavy and unforgiving. Their long swords, spathas, cut deeper than Roman blades. Roman infantry tried to maintain formation, but the heat, dust, and chaos wore them down. Still, the Romans fought bravely. Because Roman soldiers almost always did. But bravery cannot stop a disaster already in motion. The moment that changed history. In the distance, a thunder began. At first it sounded like rolling clouds. Then like drums. Then like the heartbeat of the earth. A legionary looked at the horizon and felt his blood freeze. Cavalry, he whispered. Not Roman cavalry. Not a few dozen horsemen. But a massive wave. A black tide of mounted Gothic warriors charging full speed down the hill, spears aimed, horses screaming, hooves pounding like war drums of doom. The Roman lines had no time to react. The cavalry slammed into the Roman right flank with an impact so violent it split the formation like shattered stone. Armor crumpled. Men flew. Standards fell. The Roman line collapsed. This was the moment Rome died. Not in flame. Not in politics. But in a single thunderous charge on an overheated battlefield in the Balkans. Panic spreads like fire. Rome's greatest nightmare unfolded. When one flank broke, panic spread instantly. Soldiers turned. Others pushed forward. The formation twisted, crumbled, imploded. A Roman army was meant to be a machine. Organized, precise, invincible. But now, thousands of men were trapped, shoulder to shoulder, unable to move, unable to fight, crushed by their own comrades as Gothic warriors hacked them apart from every side. A centurion screamed. Form the line. Form the. A spear cut his words short. The Gothic storm. The Goths didn't fight like the Romans expected. They fought like men with nothing left to lose. Their cavalry circled behind the Roman army. Their infantry pressed forward from the front. Their warriors climbed atop bodies to strike downward. Their arrows rained from the wagons. Rome was crushed from every direction. There was no escape. No retreat. No signal. No command. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. The emperor disappears. Valens, caught in the chaos, was surrounded by his guards. They tried desperately to pull him away, to cut an escape route through the madness. But the Gothic cavalry swept toward them like a tidal wave. Arrows filled the air. Horses trampled. Shields shattered. Men screamed. And Valens vanished. Some say he was pierced by an arrow. Some say he was trampled. Some say he was carried away and burned in a shepherd's hut. His body was never found. Rome's emperor, commander of the Eastern Empire, died unnamed, unburied, unrecognizable. And with him died the last chance to stop the collapse. The aftermath, a dead army. By evening, the sun set on the corpses of 2/3 of Rome's eastern army. 10,000 Romans lay dead. Officers. Veterans. New recruits. Elite units. Entire legions gone. One chronicler wrote, "The East had no army left. Only fear." Adrianople wasn't just a defeat. It was the death of the Roman war machine. The moment when the empire's enemies realized, Rome can bleed. Rome can break. Rome can fall. This single day reshaped the next 100 years of European history. The empire after Adrianople, how Rome tried to recover from the irrecoverable. When night fell over the fields of Adrianople, the smoke from burning wagons and shattered shields drifted into the sky like the funeral incense of an empire. The silence was haunting, broken only by the cries of the wounded, the groans of dying horses, and the distant chant of Gothic warriors celebrating a victory they themselves could barely believe. Rome had lost battles before. Rome had seen setbacks, rebellions, plagues, and crises. But this was different. After Adrianople, Rome did not simply lose an army. Rome lost the illusion that its armies were still invincible. And illusions are sometimes the only thing holding an empire together. The morning after, a broken empire awakens. At dawn, Roman survivors limped back to the city of Adrianople. Some had no shields. Some had no swords. Some had no helmets. Some had no friends left alive. One officer wrote, "I walked back with ghosts. Every step, I expected a sword in my back." The city gates opened in terror. Citizens rushed to the walls expecting Gothic raiders to storm in, but the Goths didn't immediately attack. They didn't need to. The damage was already done. Rome's Eastern Empire was now defenseless. A government in shock. News traveled fast, messengers racing on horseback to Constantinople, shouting a message the empire wasn't prepared to hear. The emperor is dead. The army is destroyed. Panic spread through the city. Markets closed. Shops sealed their doors. The Senate gathered in emergency session. Families fled to the countryside. Priests warned the gods were displeased. For the first time in centuries, the people of the Eastern Empire felt exposed. Rome had no army between the Danube frontier and Constantinople. None. The Goths at the gates. The Gothic army, exhausted but victorious, marched toward Constantinople. They expected the city to fall easily. After all, the Roman army was gone. But Constantinople was not an ordinary city. Massive walls, deep moats, fortified towers, well-trained city guards, a population ready to defend their homes. Most importantly, the walls of Constantinople were built to withstand sieges for years. The Goths attacked once, twice, 3 times. And failed. The city did not break. They had won a great battle. But they were not strong enough to take the greatest city of the East. So the Goths pulled back, spreading through the countryside, destroying villages, burning farms, ambushing surviving Roman units, and claiming land piece by piece. Rome still existed. But Rome no longer ruled. The crisis of leadership, a throne without a ruler. With Emperor Valens dead, the empire was leaderless. Commanders debated. Senators argued. Bureaucrats panicked. Generals jockeyed for power. The empire needed a new emperor quickly, someone strong, someone capable, someone who understood war. It needed a savior. And Rome found one. The rise of Theodosius, the last great Roman. In early 379 AD, a skilled but relatively unknown general was summoned from Spain. Theodosius ***. He was not flashy. Not political. Not beloved by the Senate. But he was calm under pressure, intelligent, and, most importantly, practical. When Theodosius arrived in Constantinople, he found a shattered army, empty treasury reserves, terrified citizens, rebellious generals, frontier lands overrun, the Goths roaming freely. Most men would have eyed the throne and walked away. Theodosius accepted it. Because he knew one truth. If he didn't rebuild Rome, no one would. Rebuilding an army from the bones of defeat. Theodosius immediately set to work. 1. He recruited survivors. The few legionaries who escaped Adrianople became the core of a new army. 2. He granted amnesty to deserters. Many soldiers had fled the disaster. Theodosius forgave them, knowing Rome needed every sword. 3. He hired new barbarian mercenaries. Controversial, but necessary. Rome needed manpower. And the tribes needed work. 4. He fortified city defenses. He strengthened walls from Thrace to Constantinople. 5. He reorganized command structures. Corrupt generals were removed. Incompetent officers demoted. Reliable veterans promoted. He rebuilt Rome's army. Not from glory, but from practicality. The problem no Roman emperor could fix. But even Theodosius, with all his strategy and brilliance, faced a truth no leader could erase. Rome's enemies were no longer just outside the empire. They were now inside it. The Goths were living on Roman soil. They traveled Roman roads. They harvested Roman fields. They camped in Roman forests. And now they had tasted Roman blood. They had defeated a Roman emperor. They had wiped out a Roman army. They no longer feared the empire. Rome could rebuild. But Rome could not turn back time. Theodosius negotiated peace, offering the Goths land in exchange for military service. It was clever. It was practical. But it was also dangerous. Because by giving them land, he gave them a foothold inside the empire. A foothold that would one day grow into a kingdom. Rome after Adrianople. The empire survived. But it emerged changed. Weaker. Divided. Dependent on barbarian soldiers. Fearful. Exhausted. Adrianople was not the final fall. But it was the moment Rome's decline became irreversible. One historian wrote, "After Adrianople, Rome lived, but Rome never recovered." Theodosius held the line. He preserved the empire. But the cracks born on that battlefield would widen over the next generation, until nothing could hold them together. Shorts. The day after Emperor Honorius received news of the disaster on the Rhine, a second message arrived, this one carried by a trembling African merchant captain. His ship had barely escaped raiders off the coast of Mauritania. But these were not ordinary pirates. They sailed under a banner no Roman had seen in centuries, a green eagle with burning red eyes. Honorius frowned. Another rebellion? "No, my lord," the merchant whispered. "They called themselves the Resurrected Legion." The words froze the council chamber. That name belonged to an ancient legend, an entire Roman legion that had supposedly vanished in the Sahara, swallowed by sands and hostile tribes 200 years earlier. Stories claimed the lost soldiers had founded a hidden desert kingdom, ruled by generals who no longer recognized Rome. No one paid attention to those myths, until now. The mysterious return of Legio IX Africana. The report was impossible, but additional messages confirmed it, a coordinated series of lightning raids from unknown fighters wearing Roman-style armor, painted black with scorched edges. Their weapons were modified Roman gladii, shorter, lighter, designed for speed. And they fought with a discipline Rome had not seen in a century. This mysterious force struck isolated Roman outposts, seized supply depots, and disappeared into the desert. Not a single prisoner was left behind. Not a single body either. Only the green eagle sigil carved into wooden shields. A letter from a captured port on the African coast read, "Tell the Roman emperor his abandoned sons have returned. Tell him the desert remembers." The empire, already fractured by Germanic invasions, now faced a phantom enemy from its own forgotten past. Night fell over the canyon city of the desert legions, its torchlit streets glowing like veins of fire carved into stone. Eliana Vero walked alone between the sandstone pillars, past murals showing the exile of Legio IX Africana, betrayed generals, burning supply wagons, soldiers driven into the desert. The story was powerful, but something about it didn't add up. And she finally found the clue in an unlikely place, a children's school. Inside a stone classroom, young desert-born students recited the tale of Legio IX's banishment. But the teacher held a scroll, an ancient, cracked piece of Roman parchment. Eliana asked to see it. When she touched the brittle surface, her heart jolted. The handwriting. It wasn't Roman. It was forged. Only a trained military scribe would know, but Eliana did. Legio IX Africana had not been betrayed by Rome. They had been ordered into the desert. By their own commanding general, a power-hungry officer who cut off communications and staged the disappearance to hide his atrocities against local tribes. The ancestors of these abandoned soldiers were victims, but not of Rome. They were victims of one rogue Roman general, long dead and long forgotten. And the entire Desert Legion uprising, their fury, their identity, their purpose, was built on a lie. If Aeliana revealed this truth too early, she would be killed. If she used it carefully, she could fracture the rebellion from the inside. The general who already knew the truth. Kiso Draconis seemed impossible to deceive. When Aeliana returned to his war court, a circle of obsidian chairs carved into a cliffside, he was waiting with his mask off, his expression unreadable. The teacher's scroll wasn't enough. But the original orders of the rogue Roman general, the orders that sent Legio IX into the desert, must exist somewhere. If she could find those documents and expose them publicly, the desert legions would fracture. Kiso's authority would crumble. And Rome would have a chance to breathe again. But where were those documents? Aeliana pieced it together. The general was stationed in Africa. His headquarters was a fortress near the old Roman frontier. When the legion disappeared, he fled back to Rome, alone. His archives would have been seized by the imperial bureaucracy. Meaning, the evidence was not in Africa. It was in Rome's central archive in Ravenna. And Aeliana was trapped thousands of miles away. Unless she escaped. The moon hung low over the desert, a silver coin drifting through black void. Aeliana Vero and Marika Draconis stumbled across the dunes, lungs burning, legs trembling, but behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Boots thundering. Torches blazing. The desert legions were fanning out like wolves closing in on two wounded deer. Aeliana grabbed Marika's arm. We can't outrun them in the open. We need cover. There is no cover in the desert. Marika cried. Aeliana scanned the horizon. Nothing but sand. But then, something. A faint shimmer. An unnatural line cutting across the dunes. Water. A shallow tidal basin forming from the night tide, leading toward the coast. Aeliana pointed. There. If we run through the water, we'll mask our footprints. Marika nodded, breathless. Together they sprinted toward the shallow tide basin, but the torches behind them suddenly flared brighter. Shouts filled the night. They've seen us, Aeliana said. And the chase turned deadly. The desert legions close in. Kiso's fastest riders broke ahead of the pursuers, lean horses bred for desert warfare, their hooves barely touching the sand. The riders held long spears with bronze hooks on the end, designed not to kill, but to drag fugitives back alive. They weren't here to murder Aeliana. Not yet. Marika was the target. Kiso could not allow his sister to reach Rome with the truth. A hooked spear whistled past Aeliana's head, missing her by inches. She grabbed Marika and pulled her into the shallow water. The icy tide shocked their feet, but it slowed the horses enough to buy seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. Aeliana knew this would end in blood unless she changed the battlefield. She scanned the shoreline, and there, anchored offshore, she saw salvation. A lone Roman merchant ship, its lanterns dim, crew asleep. If they reached it, they would live. If they didn't. Aeliana didn't finish the thought. "Run!" she shouted. Marika stumbled through the rising tide, robes soaked, hair clinging to her face. The riders swung their hooks again, but the wet sand dragged their horses' legs. Seconds. They had seconds. Eliana spotted driftwood near the shore, broken ship debris. She grabbed a heavy plank, turned, and swung. The spear hook smashed against the wood with a metallic clang. The rider recoiled. Eliana didn't waste time. She shoved the broken plank into the water and kept running. Marika gasped, pointing. "Look!" A rowboat was tied loosely near the shoreline, perhaps left by fishermen. Eliana's heart surged. "Get in!" But as they reached the boat, the riders broke onto the wet shore, splashing into the tide, abandoning horses, drawing curved sabers. There was no more time. Eliana shoved Marika into the boat and cut the rope with a broken shard of spear. "Row." "I can't." "Row or we die." Marika grabbed the oars, but her hands shook violently. Eliana snatched them away and rowed with terrifying strength born of pure adrenaline. The boat creaked, sliding into deeper water. The riders splashed after them, sabers raised. One leapt into the ocean, swimming with shocking speed. Another threw a spear. It missed Marika's head by inches, splashing into the dark water. The rowboat drifted farther. But not far enough. Behind them, silhouetted against torchlight on the beach, stood General Kiso Draconis himself. Bare-chested. Armor abandoned. Water dripping from his boots. And in his hand, a long, deadly throwing lance. Eliana froze. Kiso pulled back his arm. Not aiming for Eliana. Not aiming for the boat. Aiming for Marika. "No!" Eliana screamed. Kiso hurled the lance with such force that it screamed through the night air like lightning. Eliana lunged sideways, slamming her shoulder into Marika, knocking her flat inside the boat. The lance tore through the side of the hull, and the boat rocked violently. Water began pouring in. Marika gasped in horror. "He's sinking us." Eliana grabbed the oars again, her muscles screaming. "No, he's giving us a choice," she whispered. "He wants me to abandon you. He thinks I'll save myself." Marika stared at her, trembling. "But you won't." Eliana's jaw clenched. "You are the only person who can stop him." The boat lurched, half underwater now. Kiso shouted from the shore, voice echoing across the waves. "Return my sister and you live." Eliana ignored him, rowing harder. "Hold on," she shouted. The boat listed sharply. It was sinking. But the tide was pushing them outward too. A larger wave struck, lifting them slightly. From the Roman ship, a lantern flashed. Someone had seen them. A bell rang. Footsteps thundered. Voices called. Eliana forced every ounce of strength into one final push. A rope was thrown from the ship. She caught it. "Marika, climb." Marika seized the rope with shaking hands and was lifted aboard by the sailors. Eliana grabbed the line next. But the sinking boat dragged her downward. She felt the cold bite of the sea pulling her ankles. "No, no." Two sailors leaned out, shouting. "Take our hand." Eliana reached. Her fingers brushed theirs. And then a wave crashed over her, ripping her from the boat, dragging her beneath the surface. The last thing she saw as she plunged underwater was Marika screaming her name, held back by sailors. The ocean swallowed Eliana whole. The world went black. Darkness. Cold. Silence. Eliana Vero felt her lungs burn as saltwater filled her mouth and eyes. She thrashed, clawing at the wave-tossed sea. Every instinct screamed to fight, but the current was stronger, faster, merciless. For a moment, she believed she would drown here, abandoned, swallowed by the Mediterranean. Then, a hand gripped hers. "Marika. Hold on. Don't let go." Marika shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. Eliana kicked and clawed until her strength returned enough to pull herself aboard the Roman merchant ship. The deck tilted violently, and she vomited seawater, gasping for air. Around them, sailors worked furiously, tying ropes, shouting warnings as the tide surged. Kiso's fleet was still in pursuit, but the shallow bay, rocky shoals, and darkness protected the fleeing ship. The desert legions couldn't follow without losing dozens of warriors to the reefs and waves. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. Eliana collapsed beside Marika. We made it," Marika whispered, voice trembling. "No," Eliana said, shaking her head. "We survived. But Rome is still in danger." Marika's eyes widened. "They can't rebuild. Not without me, or without you." Eliana forced herself upright. Her mind, even soaked and exhausted, raced ahead. The only way to stop Kiso is to reach Ravenna with proof of the truth. The scroll, the original orders, everything. If we can show the desert legions their entire war is based on lies, their unity will crumble. Marika swallowed hard. "You really think the desert legions will believe it? After 2 centuries of hatred?" Eliana's eyes hardened. "They have to. Otherwise, Rome, and Europe, will fall." The voyage to Ravenna. The ship cut through moonlit waters. Sails snapped in the wind. The waves pounded the hull. Every shadow along the coast could hide enemies. Every dark shape in the sky might be a torchlit boat from Kiso's fleet. Eliana and Marika huddled below deck, examining maps and scrolls. The path to Ravenna was long, treacherous, and filled with political dangers. Pirates, rival mercenaries, and rogue Roman governors could all intercept them. Marika pointed to a spot near the Straits of Messina. "If we hug the coast, we can avoid open waters where Kiso's ships can attack," she said. Eliana nodded. "Good. We'll risk the coastline. But the desert legions may have spies even in port cities. We can't trust anyone." For days, they traveled in near silence. The sailors whispered rumors about the desert legions, how they were no longer a myth. Survivors from northern Africa spoke of villages razed, towns surrendered, entire river valleys abandoned. Ravenna, the imperial seat in the west, seemed impossibly far. Yet every day brought them closer. And with each passing night, the urgency grew. Rome's future hung in the balance, not in grand armies or sieges, but in the hands of 2 women carrying centuries of truth across a stormy sea. The strategic revelation. On the 4th night, as the ship passed near Brindisi, Eliana revealed the final piece of her plan. Kiso's power came not only from his soldiers but from his alliances, Vandals, Goths, and rebellious Roman generals. If those allies could be turned, or at least sown with doubt, Kiso's entire campaign could collapse without a single battle. "We don't need to defeat him with swords," Aeliana said. "We need to defeat him with information. Lies versus truth. Faith versus doubt. His soldiers believe in vengeance. We'll give them reality, and it will destroy their myth." Marika frowned. "You're asking me to betray my brother." "No," Aeliana said sharply. "You're not betraying him, you're saving him. You're saving hundreds of thousands from unnecessary death. And you're saving Rome." Marika hesitated, hand on the carved hilt of her dagger, a family heirloom. Then she nodded slowly. "Then we do it," she said. "For Rome, and for truth. Ravenna, the final legal and military checkmate." 3 days later, the merchant ship reached the port of Ravenna. Dawn broke over the Adriatic, painting the city in gold and rose. From the harbor, the imperial walls rose like teeth against the sky. Here, the bureaucracy of Rome, and the archives holding centuries of documents, could provide the evidence needed. But Aeliana and Marika knew it wouldn't be simple. The archives were controlled by a faction loyal to the emperor. Some generals would resist releasing documents that could destabilize alliances. Others feared Kiso's wrath if proof of the truth spread. And worst of all, Kiso would not wait idly. He would know the women had escaped. He would pursue. And he would strike where Rome was weakest, its fear. Aeliana clenched her fists, feeling the weight of history pressing down. "Every failure of Rome," she whispered, "every lost legion, every corrupt general, every emperor too proud or too blind, it all comes to this. One truth can undo centuries of lies." Marika's eyes glimmered. "We'll need the Senate's full support," she said. "And the soldiers still loyal to Rome." Aeliana nodded. "And time, we have almost none." The sun rose over Ravenna. The empire was fragile. The desert legions were strong. And the most dangerous part was yet to come. "We don't need to defeat him with swords," Aeliana said. "We need to defeat him with information. Lies versus truth. Faith versus doubt. His soldiers believe in vengeance. We'll give them reality, and it will destroy their myth." Marika frowned. "You're asking me to betray my brother." "No," Aeliana said sharply. "You're not betraying him, you're saving him. You're saving hundreds of thousands from unnecessary death. And you're saving Rome." Marika hesitated, hand on the carved hilt of her dagger, a family heirloom. Then she nodded slowly. "Then we do it," she said. "For Rome, and for truth. Ravenna, the final legal and military checkmate." 3 days later, the merchant ship reached the port of Ravenna. Dawn broke over the Adriatic, painting the city in gold and rose. From the harbor, the imperial walls rose like teeth against the sky. Here, the bureaucracy of Rome, and the archives holding centuries of documents, could provide the evidence needed. But Aeliana and Marika knew it wouldn't be simple. The archives were controlled by a faction loyal to the emperor. Some generals would resist releasing documents that could destabilize alliances. Others feared Kiso's wrath if proof of the truth spread. And worst of all, Kiso would not wait idly. He would know the women had escaped. He would pursue. And he would strike where Rome was weakest, it's fear. Aeliana clenched her fists, feeling the weight of history pressing down. Every failure of Rome, she whispered, every lost legion, every corrupt general, every emperor too proud or too blind, it all comes to this. One truth can undo centuries of lies. Marika's eyes glimmered. We'll need the Senate's full support, she said. And the soldiers still loyal to Rome. Aeliana nodded. And time, we have almost none. The sun rose over Ravenna. The empire was fragile. The desert legions were strong. And the most dangerous part was yet to come. Because history does not forgive hesitation. The streets of Ravenna were quiet, almost eerily so. Merchants swept their doorsteps, dogs barked in distant courtyards, and the first morning sun glinted off the polished marble of the city walls. But inside the imperial archives, Aeliana Vero and Marika Draconis felt none of the calm. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of impending danger. They were strangers in a city where allegiances shifted like sand, where a single wrong word could mean death, or betrayal. The knowledge they carried, centuries old and long hidden, could topple an empire, or save it. ### the archives, treasures of truth. The archives were enormous, built over decades with multiple wings, hidden vaults, and labyrinthine passages. Documents from every corner of the empire, military orders, letters from generals, decrees from emperors, and reports from scouts, were carefully catalogued here. But the ones Aeliana sought were buried deep. The original orders of the rogue general who exiled Legio IX Africana. Correspondence proving Rome had not abandoned its soldiers. Reports showing the systematic deception that fueled Kiso's rebellion. These papers, if revealed to the desert legions, could dismantle the very foundation of Kiso's authority. But there was a catch. The archives were guarded not just by soldiers, but by bureaucrats who feared the emperor's wrath more than anything else. One wrong move, and they would alert the Senate, or worse, Kiso's spies hidden in Ravenna. Aeliana's strategy. Aeliana whispered to Marika as they approached a heavily reinforced wing of the archives. We won't storm it. That would alert everyone and ruin our chance. We need precision. Timing. Stealth. Marika nodded, heart pounding. How do we do that? Aeliana pulled a small device, a mechanical contraption of gears and wires, almost like a miniature lockpicking machine. It was one of her inventions, designed to bypass the most secure doors of the Roman archives without leaving a trace. This, she said, gets us in. Once inside, we grab the scrolls, the orders, the evidence. Then we vanish before anyone knows we were here. The secret passage. Hours passed as they crawled through dust-filled corridors, avoiding patrolling guards. The air smelled of old parchment and ink. Faint sunlight streamed through cracks in the vaulted ceilings, highlighting murals depicting Rome's triumphs over barbarian hordes. Finally, they reached a nondescript wall with a lock that shimmered in the dim light. This is it, whispered Aeliana. She set the device on the lock. The gears clicked, whirred, and after what felt like an eternity, the door silently swung open. Inside, shelves stretched endlessly, filled with centuries of Roman records. They moved quickly, scanning titles, cross-referencing lists, until, at last, they found what they had come for, the orders of the rogue general, complete with signatures, seals, and detailed plans that proved Legio IX Africana had been sent into exile intentionally, not abandoned by Rome. Eliana's hands trembled as she lifted the parchment. Marika leaned in. "This is it," she breathed. "This is what will break him. The pursuit begins." But even as they prepared to leave, a sound froze them in place: footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, echoing through the archive halls. Kiso's spies had followed them. The desert legions were not far behind. Eliana and Marika exchanged a glance. There was no time to debate. "Split up," Eliana hissed. "Draw them away. I'll carry the scrolls." Marika hesitated. But then she nodded and bolted down a side corridor. The footsteps split, the guards chasing Marika, leaving Eliana a narrow window. She clutched the scrolls and dashed through a hidden stairwell leading to the rooftops of Ravenna. Aerial escape. The Roman rooftops were a maze of terracotta tiles and narrow alleys. Eliana sprinted, leaping from roof to roof, the scrolls clutched tightly against her chest. Behind her, the clatter of boots followed relentlessly. She knew she couldn't fight, she could only outrun them. Below, the streets were waking. Merchants were opening shops, citizens walking toward fountains. No one noticed the lone figure leaping across the skyline, carrying centuries of truth. She reached the edge of the city where the walls overlooked the Adriatic. Below, a small contingent of loyal Roman soldiers, tipped off by Marika before her escape, had prepared a flat-bottomed vessel. She leapt, and landed inside, narrowly avoiding the edge. A sailor pushed off, and the boat glided silently through the water, away from the city and toward the open sea. The final strategic move. Eliana looked back at Ravenna. The city that had survived countless sieges, political coups, and rebellions now seemed almost fragile from this distance. She held the scrolls tightly. They were not just paper, they were the weapon that could save Rome without a single battle. Marika joined her on the boat, eyes wide, lips trembling. "They'll come after us," she said. "The desert legions. Kiso, they'll follow." "They will," Eliana replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But when they see the truth, their empire of lies will crumble. And Rome will have a chance to fight another day." The wind caught the sails. The waves reflected the first light of dawn. Eliana knew the coming days would decide the fate of the Western Empire, the desert legions, and the balance of power in Europe. One truth, one scroll, and the course of history could be changed forever. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, Kiso Draconis and his legendary army were already moving, hungry for vengeance, ready to claim a destiny built on centuries of deception. The wind whipped across the Adriatic as Eliana and Marika sailed south, the Roman coastline receding behind them. Dawn painted the sea gold and crimson, but there was no time to admire the beauty. The desert legions would pursue, Kiso would stop at nothing. Every decision now could mean the difference between Rome surviving or collapsing entirely. Marika leaned against the mast, gripping the edge of the boat, her eyes wide. "How do we even convince them?" she asked. "They've lived with this lie for centuries. They believe Rome betrayed them. They won't just listen to a scroll." Eliana's eyes narrowed. She had thought of that. The scroll alone would not be enough, it needed to be backed by witnesses, proof, and the symbolic authority of Rome itself. "We won't just show them the orders," she said. "We'll expose the truth in front of everyone, soldiers, generals, and citizens. We'll turn Kiso's army against him using what they hold most sacred, loyalty to their own ancestors and to Rome's honor. The secret ally. By nightfall, the ship reached the outskirts of a small port in southern Italy. Aeliana had arranged a rendezvous with a secret ally, Gaius Marcellinus, one of the last remaining officers of the Eastern legions who had survived Adrianople. He had been hiding in the hills, planning to strike Kiso if the desert legions ever advanced into Italy. Gaius greeted them quietly, his face weathered, eyes filled with the weight of countless battles. "You've done well to survive," he said, glancing at the scrolls. "But surviving is not winning. Kiso will come. And he will come with fury unmatched." Aeliana handed him the documents. "We need your men. And your authority. We need to confront him, not in battle, but in truth." Gaius' brow furrowed. "To confront him, in truth. Are you certain?" Aeliana nodded. "If we fail, Rome dies. If we succeed, his empire crumbles without a single legion lost." Gaius finally smiled grimly. "Then let's prepare." Kiso's fury was visible in every line of his face, every flex of his hands on the reins. The desert legions, trained to absolute discipline, wavered as murmurs spread through the ranks. Doubt is contagious. And Aeliana and Marika had planted it like a seed in dry soil. Kiso roared, raising his sword high. "Soldiers of Legio IX Africana. Are you fools? Do you betray me, your leader, your destiny? Will you let women and papers undo centuries of honor?" Some soldiers lowered their heads. Others looked to one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Then, a murmur grew into a chorus. "Is this true? Did Rome truly betray us? Or have we been lied to?" Kiso's face darkened further. He realized the delicate control he had exercised for decades was slipping. The first defection. It began with a single lieutenant, a veteran whose forefathers had been part of Legio IX. "Brother," he said, turning to Kiso, "we cannot follow vengeance built on lies." Before Kiso could respond, the man stepped from the ranks and approached Aeliana. He bowed, then raised his hand toward the scrolls. "I choose truth." The murmurs became louder. Soldiers stepped out of formation, some kneeling to witness the scroll. Kiso's army, once a monolith of obedience, was fracturing before his eyes. Aeliana pressed her advantage, voice ringing across the Via Appia. "You have lived your lives believing betrayal. But here is the truth. Legio IX Africana was sent into exile by a rogue general, one man, not Rome. Your ancestors did not suffer at the hands of the empire, they were victims of greed and ambition. Today, you reclaim your honor, not through vengeance, but through knowledge." The collapse of command. Kiso's face twisted in rage. He spurred his horse forward, cutting a path toward Aeliana, sword raised. "You dare humiliate me in front of my army," he shouted. Marika stepped forward, voice strong. "You are no general. You are a liar. And we will show the world the truth." Soldiers hesitated as Kiso charged. Aeliana remained calm, scrolls held high. Just as Kiso neared her, several of his top lieutenants intercepted him, throwing themselves between brother and sister. They had chosen truth over blind loyalty. Kiso skidded to a halt, horse rearing. Behind him, the army was no longer united. Confusion spread. Soldiers questioned orders, glanced at the scrolls, and debated whether they had been living a false narrative. The desert legions, once unstoppable, now teetered on the edge of collapse. The turning point. Aeliana knew the moment was critical. She spoke louder, every word deliberate. Your destiny is not built on lies. Reclaim your honor. Reclaim your identity. Defend Rome if you must, but do not let vengeance destroy you. Soldiers began to kneel, not in submission, but in recognition of truth. Kiso's control was gone. His followers, who had feared him for generations, now saw him for what he truly was, a man clinging to a myth. Kiso screamed, furious, but it was futile. The army that had once obeyed without question now openly defied him. Even the most loyal of his warriors faced the reality: their campaign, their rage, their lives, everything, was based on a lie. Kiso's defeat without blood. Cornered by truth, Kiso's empire crumbled. Soldiers left him one by one. Alliances with Vandals, Goths, and rebel Roman generals evaporated. By sundown, Kiso was alone on the Via Appia, facing the full reality of a lifetime built on deception. Aeliana approached him cautiously, scrolls in hand. Kiso Draconis, she said softly, your army has chosen truth over vengeance. The empire of lies ends here. Kiso fell to his knees, realizing his ambitions had been undone without a single sword striking him. The desert legions had surrendered, not to Rome, not to an army, but to the truth itself. Marika stepped forward, placing a hand on her brother's shoulder. Now you see, she whispered, we are stronger with honesty than we ever were with lies. Kiso nodded slowly, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. For the first time, the soldier who had sought to destroy Rome understood, loyalty and honor could not exist in deception. The aftermath. Rome had survived. The desert legions returned to their lands, no longer fueled by vengeance, but integrated carefully into the empire. Many leaders, inspired by the confrontation on the Via Appia, swore oaths of loyalty to Rome, not blind obedience, but informed allegiance. Aeliana Vero became a legend, celebrated as the strategist who preserved the empire without a single battlefield massacre. Marika Draconis was hailed as the bridge between Rome and the exiled legions, proof that truth could unify even generations of anger. Kiso Draconis, humbled and reformed, lived quietly, mentoring the next generation of leaders, teaching them the danger of myths and the power of truth. The Western Empire had endured, not because its armies were invincible, but because one woman had wielded knowledge as a weapon, one sister had chosen honesty over family loyalty, and history itself had been redirected by courage and cunning. Rome's military collapse had been averted, but the lesson remained: armies alone could not save an empire, truth and leadership did. Months passed after the confrontation on the Via Appia. The Mediterranean sun rose over Ravenna, its golden rays glinting off marble walls, restored bridges, and newly repaired fortifications. Rome had survived, not through armies or conquest, but through cunning, truth, and courage. Yet the scars of near collapse were everywhere. Aeliana Vero walked through the rebuilt administrative halls of Ravenna, now serving as a center for military, political, and cultural reform. Generals, bureaucrats, and loyal soldiers gathered to witness what she had accomplished, a new model of governance where knowledge, discipline, and integrity were valued above blind obedience. Marika Draconis, once the sister of a rebel, now stood beside her as an official liaison between Rome and the former desert legions. Her presence symbolized unity and reconciliation, proof that even centuries of exile and hatred could be overcome by truth. Reintegrating the desert legions. Piso Draconis, humbled but unbroken, led the desert legions back into Roman territories, not as conquerors, but as allied defenders. His army, once fueled by vengeance, now became the backbone of a restructured military force. Former enemies, once sworn against Rome, were trained alongside loyal Roman soldiers, blending desert tactics with Roman discipline. Aeliana oversaw this integration personally, understanding that Rome's survival depended on innovation, not nostalgia. The empire could no longer rely solely on massed legions. It required smaller, adaptable forces, skilled in strategy, intelligence, and rapid response. Piso's transformation became a lesson. Even those once seen as threats could be turned into pillars of stability if guided by knowledge and honesty. Political reforms and prevention of future collapse. Under Aeliana's guidance, the Senate enacted sweeping reforms. Decentralized command ***. Provincial governors were given authority to recruit, train, and supply their own forces, reducing reliance on distant imperial commands. Merit-based leadership ***. Military positions were no longer bought or inherited but earned through skill, discipline, and loyalty. Record-keeping and transparency ***. Archives were expanded and digitized, in the form of early codices, to prevent forgery, misinformation, and political manipulation. Citizen militias ***. Local communities were trained as auxiliary forces, providing intelligence and support in times of crisis. Rome had learned a hard lesson: an empire cannot survive on fear, lies, or blind loyalty alone. Leadership and truth were the most powerful weapons of all. Cultural impact and legacy. The story of Legio IX Africana, once a tale of betrayal and vengeance, became a symbol of redemption and resilience. Schools taught the saga, not as myth, but as a case study in leadership, loyalty, and the consequences of misinformation. Marika's writings on the desert legions became required reading for every soldier and official, emphasizing unity, justice, and the importance of questioning authority when history and fact diverge. Piso himself, though humbled, became an honored military strategist, mentoring new generals and sharing the lessons of his own hubris. He frequently spoke to young recruits. An army without truth is a storm without anchor. Discipline may hold it for a time, but lies will sink it. Rome's new golden age. Or a fragile peace. With Aeliana at the helm of strategy, Marika bridging cultural divides, and Piso transforming from enemy to ally, the Western Empire stabilized. Trade routes reopened, cities were reconstructed, and the specter of rebellion faded. Yet the memory of near collapse remained etched in every heart. Rome had survived not because of brute force or legendary armies, but because individuals had dared to confront lies, wield knowledge, and act with courage. The empire was stronger, wiser, and more flexible, but also reminded that complacency could bring disaster in a heartbeat. The story of the Desert Legions and Legio IX Africana endured as a lesson across generations. Armies can fight battles. Generals can win wars. But only truth, leadership, and courage can save an empire. Rome endured, transformed, and cautious. Its legions marched once again, not blindly, not out of fear, but with purpose. And in every scroll, every lesson, Every soldier trained under Aeliana's watchful eye, the empire carried forward the hard-won understanding: the greatest weapon of Rome was not its sword, but its knowledge. Years had passed since the confrontation on the Via Appia, yet the lessons of that day continued to shape Rome. Aeliana Vero, once a strategist walking the fine line between life and death, now oversaw the empire's military reforms. Her influence extended beyond generals and soldiers. She advised emperors, governors, and even scholars. Knowledge, she had learned, was the most potent weapon of all. Marica Draconis had become a living bridge between cultures. Former enemies now served alongside Rome's legions, their histories preserved and respected. She traveled across provinces, sharing the story of the desert legions, teaching that truth could unify where fear and lies divided. Kiso Draconis, once a figure of vengeance, lived humbly, mentoring the next generation of soldiers. His former hubris had been tempered by humility and knowledge of the consequences of deception. Rome itself had evolved. The empire no longer relied solely on massive armies or fear to maintain control. Strategic intelligence, meritocratic leadership, and careful diplomacy became its backbone. Cities rebuilt, trade routes flourished, and distant provinces that had once teetered on rebellion now became strongholds of loyalty and stability. The lesson of history. The events surrounding the Desert Legions and Legio IX Africana became more than a story, they became a cautionary tale. Scholars, soldiers, and citizens alike remembered. Blind loyalty without truth can destroy nations. Leadership requires courage, vision, and honesty. Armies alone cannot save an empire. Knowledge, strategy, and moral integrity do. The scrolls, once a secret weapon, were preserved in the imperial archives. Their legacy endured, guiding future generations to question, analyze, and act with foresight. Aeliana stood atop the rebuilt walls of Ravenna, looking out over the Adriatic. The wind carried the salt and the promise of peace. She thought of the deserts where Kiso's army had once roamed, the bloodline of Legio IX Africana, and the countless lives shaped by deception and truth alike. The empire survives, she whispered. Not because we fought harder, but because we chose truth over lies, courage over fear, and wisdom over rage. Marica joined her, standing silently beside her sister in arms. Together, they watched as the sun set over Rome, casting golden light over the city, the seas, and the empire they had helped save. The Western Empire had endured. History had been rewritten, not by swords, but by the bravery of a few willing to face the truth. And though threats would arise again, one certainty remained: Rome's greatest strength was no longer just its armies, it was the knowledge, integrity, and courage of its people.